Hi everyone, I'm Iaian Camacho. I'm the product designer on the package stage. Today I wanted to share with you some of the solution validation that we've been doing on the package stage recently. Specifically, we have both an unmoderated solution validation and a moderated solution validation. And so I'm going to go through the two different tests and talk a little bit about the difference between the two of them and the advantages therein. For a quick review, the package stage, we are responsible for taking build up pieces of code and other dependencies, storing them in a registry for our users, and then reliably delivering them out to the CI or pipelines or to engineers' computers or out to different platforms and stuff like that. So we have the container registry, the package registry, and a few other kind of asset management tools in there. Today, I want to talk about the solution validation we did for two different aspects on the package stage. First, I'd like to talk about the dependency proxy, which I've shared in a previous showcase around what it is and how it's useful. We did a moderated solution validation to see if the vision and our plan for that is really going to help our users. And then afterwards, I'm going to talk about a cleanup policy redesign that we did. We got some feedback from our users that the settings interface was a little confusing. So we redesigned it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the unmoderated study we did for updating that user interface and the terms that we use in there. Diving into the dependency proxy validation, the major question we had from the research perspective was, does the proposed solutions enable users of large organizations to manage packages in many different locations effectively? We've heard from some of our customers, and the larger they are, the more we tend to hear this, that they're not just hosting their packages in GitLab or just in public registries, but they'll also have their own third-party registries that they're storing or archiving packages in. To do this test, we did a moderated test, structured as a usability study, but really had deep dive exploration aspects to it to really understand if the solution we were proposing was going to help our users, how and when they would use it, questions like that. So first, what we did is we asked the users to find the dependency proxy in the product, be able to navigate to it, and then describe the UI that they saw, what details was included, what information was relevant, if there was any information they expected to see that didn't. Once we had that conversation, we asked them to connect a new remote registry. This again was kind of the user study side of it. Were they able to find the right button, understand what all the different fields in the form were for, and able to work through it, answer all the questions they knew they would need to, and be able to move forward. From there, we asked them to then create a virtual registry, which is a combination of many registries into one single endpoint, so that a DevOps engineer or a leader and a manager in that area could make one URL that the rest of the engineering team could use, and nobody would really need to pay attention to it, streamlining efforts in general, making sure there's not duplicate packages in places, as well as being able to integrate with secure and defend kind of features. One thing that was pretty cool about this moderated study was that we were able to recruit participants through sales as well as through our traditional recruiting efforts. We've heard from some of our customers that the reason they would struggle to move over to GitLab for their package needs specifically revolve around these kind of features. So it was really powerful to be able to do this test with those users, the ones that are specifically saying they need it, and then ask, if we built this, would that be able to make it easier for you to move over? So that was really, really cool. And it was one of the first times we recruited from sales for a usability study, and it worked pretty well. So we completed the testing, and we came up with quite a few research insights, and then we presented those insights during our package Think Big session. So not only did we do the study, we were able to change our strategy and make some design adjustments, but everyone on the team, including engineers and sales, were able to see that feedback and the adjustments we were making and have a good conversation about it. The really great news is the proposed solutions were really positively received. We walked through a lot of these different aspects of the study, and then at the end asked them, if this was available today, would you be able to utilize it? Would it make it easier for your team? Things like that. And universally, we got positive responses from that. Selfishly, from the design side, participants consistently understood the UI. So the actual screens that we put in front of them, the data we were presenting, how we were organizing it, made sense to our users. They were able to describe that data without getting lost or confused. And especially considering a lot of this is new ideas and concepts, it's really important that they were able to understand that information. One of the aspects we were kind of surprised about was the idea of caching packages that were proxy from outside registries was a lot more important to our users than we had initially thought. We added a little bit to the design that basically was a checkbox that said, we'll cache it for 30 days. And it ended up being a focus of conversation with almost everyone. So that was an exciting little learning for us, and it'll apply a little bit later in how we wanted to build it. We also learned that the MVC that we were planning on producing had limitations in the number of registries that could be grouped together in one virtual registry. We learned that there was going to be some limitations, that those limitations were going to inhibit some of the users from being able to utilize this feature fully. They had more registries involved than we were kind of allowing. What was cool and the advantage of doing a moderated test is that we were able to explore that a little more deeply and understand their needs. And we discovered that the number of remote registries was actually pretty limited, but the number of registries hosted in GitLab was a lot larger. If I have an organization and I have 100 teams that each have 100 projects and each one produces a package, they're all kind of in one place, but the way we had built the MVC, they counted towards that minimal limit of 10. That information really helped us understand and find a workaround so that the limitations we have on the technical side would still enable our users. And one of the last big learnings that we had was that the terms that we're using, specifically hosted, remote, and virtual registries as terms to describe these different parts of the features, were not immediately clear to our users. The good news of that was by the end of the study, after going through all the different pieces, they understood what it meant, how they worked together, and were able to use the terms in conversation. So they're very learnable. And what this means in terms of us actually building the solution is when we think about documentation or how we talk about the features, we need to be really clear about what those terms mean, how they're related to each other, and how they get used. Next steps, after we've done all of that solution validation, was to break down this really large solution into actionable steps. One of the advantages of doing the solution validation is that we got a lot of data of what was most important to our users, and that was able to inform an MVC style iteration. When we first started talking through how to build this large feature, it really felt like we would have to take many milestones to build all of it before we could actually deliver any value to our users. And that's not MVC. It's kind of missing that viable part. And so the iterations didn't really make sense. Taking a step back, what we decided to do is kind of break it apart as you see here. So the first step is we have request forwarding for NPM. So if a package isn't available in our hosted registries, we would go out to npmjs.org and see if we could pull it from there. That's the default registry for NPM. We're going to upgrade that functionality that already exists to make it act a little bit more as a proxy. From there, we're going to implement a 30-day cache, which is a really simple tool that whenever we pull a package from that remote registry, we'll keep a copy of it. And if for whatever reason we aren't able to reach npm js.org, that remote registry, then we can pull from the cache, and that raises the stability of pipelines and a lot of other things like that. What's kind of interesting is during the study, when we talked about caching, npm going down or becoming unavailable was consistently the story they told of why caching was so important for stability. So to be able to pull that out as the first one and deliver that caching value right out of the gate was really helpful. After we built the cache itself, we're going to create a UI to help display what's being cached, as well as allow users to kind of purge the cache entirely or remove specific packages from the cache, helping them manage for when they have problems with troubleshooting, or if a package has been updated, things like that. After we've kind of built those 3 stages for NPM itself, we'll expand the proxy and caching mechanisms to other package formats. We're going to start with Maven after that. It's our next most popular package manager. As we start to expand it, we'll then also start working in the idea that instead of having only one remote registry that you can make that request from, the specific one we've said is the one we're going to pull from, will allow users to set up another remote registry to be able to pull from. That slowly gets us to the idea of connecting many registries together. From there, we will enable users to combine those multiple registries and remotes that they've set up into one API endpoint. That's that virtual registry idea right at the end of the story. And then from there, we'll start integrating with security and compliance and make sure that the dependencies that we're pulling in meet standards, we're able to flag if there's any warnings around that, and that kind of information, make it feel a lot more stable and secure for our users. Moving on to the second solution validation that I wanted to bring up was around this cleanup policy UI. I've talked about it a little bit before, but we have a way to automatically remove old images and tags from the container registry using this tool called the cleanup policies. We heard from our users that the way the UI was presenting itself wasn't very clear, and they were getting a little confused in the terms that were being used, and so we wanted to redesign that. We did, and this solution validation was really focused on, do users now understand and feel confident using these new terms in the new settings layout in the new UI? This is an automatic and destructive action, so making sure users feel comfortable with it is incredibly important to be able to get adoption. We ran an unmoderated test to basically ask a larger variety of users and ask them a really simple question. Can you describe what each one of these fields mean? So during that unmoderated test, which means there's nobody there to help them, they're just kind of on their own, we first asked them to find the cleanup policy settings related to a container registry. We asked them how they would enable or disable the automatic cleanup. And then from there, we asked them to explain details related to each of the fields. What impact does this field have on a cleanup policy? What other options do you expect to be there? And lastly, of the options we're providing, which would your organization utilize? Then we ended the test with a couple of wrap-up questions like, how confident do you feel in using this UI? How easy is it to understand? Stuff like that. One of the advantages of unmoderated testing is it's got a little bit of lower overhead and easier to get some more participants. So for this test, we were able to get 15 participants, which was really cool to test kind of one settings UI. 8 of them were sourced through the unmoderated testing tool that we used. And we were able to get all 8 of those responses within 24 hours. So it's a lot faster than some of our more traditional recruiting methods. On top of that, we were able to source 7 additional customers to try out and participate in the test from there. We had a little bit of a hiccup, and so I've only gotten the full results a couple of days ago, so I haven't quite finished the synthesis of it. But so far, we've already gotten some really great insights. A majority of the participants either strongly agreed or agreed with the idea that the interface was easy to understand. The available options for each of the fields matched the expectations when we asked users to predict what was going to be there. And the options that we're providing, users selected a variety of them that would work for their organization, which means that we have the right number of options in the right areas, instead of one option always being the one that's chosen. One thing we did learn is that users expected the cleanup policy to be able to be accessed from the registry UI. Right now it is in the package registry settings. And so we know that one of the things we can do to make it a little easier is directly connect the container registry to these settings. And one of the things that we did learn on the settings page itself is that there was some confusion between when we say keep the most recent X tags in the image repository. Some users thought that we were referring to when it was being published, which is what it is using, and others referred to when it was being last pulled. So you could have a tag that has been there for years, but it was pulled yesterday, so we're not going to get rid of it. And so we need to make sure that we're a little clearer on that. Next steps for this is we're going to iterate on the design itself based on some of that feedback once I finish the synthesis and make sure we have all of the information we need. And then lastly, prepare the issue for development, get it ready for the front end, tech writing review, and we'll send it on its way. To wrap up, I wanted to talk a little bit about moderated testing versus unmoderated testing and kind of reflect on the experience of being able to do both of them. One of the pros, the pros for moderated testing, and I think the most important one, is that you can ask participants why. You are there and you can watch them go through something, and when they hit a hiccup or they have an answer you didn't expect, you can stop the test and just ask them, why do you think that? What are things that could have been done better? How would you use it? And really follow up on those questions. Another advantage to moderated testing is that if the user gets stuck or is confused, you're there to help them. And you can kind of guide them through the next part of the test and keep them moving forward. one of the big advantages when we did the moderated testing for the dependency proxy is that when a user responded with something or got excited about an idea, we jumped in and were able to really in-depth explore that idea. And one selfish bit is that you get live feedback on the actual test you produced. So if you're doing moderated testing and you have your first participant and your prototype breaks, you know right then and there that that happened. You can fix it so that the next session is a lot cleaner. Some of the cons for moderated testing, the recruiting and scheduling can be difficult or time consuming, especially as a global company. Having people all over the world, time zones can be a real struggle. And so that overhead can be kind of time consuming. Your data can be trickier to get consistent or quantitative data from all of your studies, because you're able to ask why in some studies and not in others means that you're not going to be able to necessarily say 7 of 7 users said this. And overall, it's just a little bit more expensive. On the unmoderated testing side, some of the pros, and my personal favorite, is that it is very async friendly, which is a GitLab favorite, and the overall overhead is lower. We can send the test out to a participant. They can do it whenever they have the time to do it, and it works really well. No time zones, no calendars. It's quite wonderful. Because there's no way to adjust the test as you're running it, unmoderated tests also kind of produce more consistent data, which makes it a lot faster to synthesize. And unmoderated testing is really good when you're looking for the usability of a solution or a design or a concept, because you're asking them to complete tasks and then being able to rate time on task or how long they took to do it, etc. Some of the cons is that unmoderated testing requires that you have a set of fixed questions and there's no option for follow-up. You can't ask that why, you just kind of get whatever they say at the time. If the user gets stuck, you can't really guide or help them. Nobody's there. So if they get stuck and they can't move forward in the test, that kind of just ends the session. And that both doesn't feel very good for the person taking the test and doesn't provide a lot of data. And lastly, the testing is just more rigid. So you have to be very clear about what you're asking. You have to always ask the same questions for every participant, and always have to end every question with and explain your answer, because otherwise they kind of won't. Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to this. Special thanks to Tim, David, Adam, Lori, and the rest of the package team for all your help with the solution validation, as well as some of the engineers participating in shadowing the research. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? I typed a couple in the chat, Ian. You can pick which one you want to answer, if any.
Sure. I think unmoderated, so the question is, do you think unmoderated testing might be more bias-proof than moderated testing? I think that it does have less of a bias because there's no option for a follow-up question. And so based on their responses, you can't change or expand on the test. So you're going to get the same result every time. And because it is kind of blind, they're not talking to you, which means they're going to possibly act more naturally and your feedback is just going to be more straightforward. So I would assume that it is more bias proof. I would definitely ask my researcher, who is Lori, around how far that lack of bias goes, because I'm sure the way you phrase questions can kind of impact that. But my guess would be that it is a little bit more bias proof.
Cool. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions before we move on?